Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we are walking right into the center of a storm. We're grappling with a topic that feels both ancient, almost biblical, and yet if you just look at the news, it is urgently, and I'd say terrifyingly modern.
We are looking at anti-Semitism,
Mm-hmm.
but, and this is really critical for everyone listening, we aren't just looking at it as a simple prejudice.
Right.
We aren't here to talk about mean tweets or, individual acts of bigotry. We're looking at it as a system.
A shape-shifting, adaptive system of belief. That right there is the core premise we need to unpack today.
So the systemic question is this: how does this specific, let's call it a virus, manage to survive and even mutate across completely opposite political landscapes?
And not just survive, but thrive. How does it find a home on the extreme right, the extreme left, and in religious fundamentalism all at the same time?
And, well, here's the most uncomfortable question, and it's really the hook for this entire deep dive. How does it persist and even surge within societies like modern America, the societies that explicitly claim to be built on liberal and democratic values?
Exactly. The whole assumption was that liberal democracy was the cure, right?
Right.
We thought, if we have free speech, open elections, a constitution, this kind of ancient hatred would just sort of wither away. But the data, the reality on the ground, suggests the cure isn't working as well as we thought.
The source material we're using to map out this terrain is the book How to Fight Anti-Semitism by Bari Weiss. Now, before we really dive in, I want to be crystal clear about our mission here.
Yeah, this is important.
This isn't a book review.
Yeah.
We are not here to adjudicate Bari Weiss's personal political opinions or to get into some, deep theological debate about Judaism.
Right. We are here to do a structural analysis. We want to understand the machinery of this hatred. Weiss argues that what we're seeing isn't just a collection of random, isolated attacks.
It's a symptom.
It's a symptom of a much, much deeper institutional failure. It's a crisis in how we perceive reality, and maybe even more importantly, how we perceive our neighbors.
And the context for this analysis is it's vital.
Yeah.
Weiss describes a current landscape that's defined by a perfect storm of factors.
A convergence, yeah. You have this rising political polarization where the center is just collapsing.
Totally. Then you have identity-based movements that rely on really strict, almost rigid categorization of people.
And you pour on the gasoline of online radicalization, and then you have the hard data.
The violence.
Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, Muncie. I mean, the statistics show a clear, undeniable spike in violent attacks on Jewish communities. This isn't a theoretical exercise.
No.
The crisis in perception here is that a lot of people think anti-Semitism is a relic of the past, something from grainy black and white documentaries about the 1940s, while the reality on the ground is that it is very much alive and it is weaponized.
So let's start with the context of the book and the author herself, because it really sets the stage for this shattering of perception that we're talking about. Bari Weiss is a journalist. She focuses on culture and politics, and she's a native of Pittsburgh. And she describes growing up in the neighborhood of Squirrel Hill,
which she calls an urban shtetl. And that's, it's a loving description in the text. It was a place where Jewish life was just. It was vibrant, it was visible, and most of all, it was safe.
You could walk to synagogue. You could see neighbors celebrating holidays. It was a community that was really woven into the fabric of the city.
Absolutely. And her perception of America, growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, was that it was a new Jerusalem.
A safe harbor.
A safe harbor.
Yeah.
For her generation of American Jews, there was this really deeply held belief that the bad old days were over. Europe had its pogroms, the Middle East had its conflicts, but America was different.
She calls it a holiday from history.
That is such a potent phrase, isn't it?
It really is.
The idea that American Jews had basically taken a vacation from the historical norm of persecution, they truly believed that America was the exception to the rule.
That here, the Constitution and the social contract were strong enough to keep the wolves at bay, permanently.
And then that holiday ended.
Abruptly, October 27, 2018. The Tree of Life massacre.
This is the catalyst for the entire book. It is the moment the timeline splits into a before and an after.
Yeah.
Weiss details getting a text from her sister, and it just said, "There is a shooter at Tree of Life."
And she types back, what was it? Is dad.
Just 2 words. Not even a full sentence. The sheer panic in that exchange, you can feel it in the text. It brings it down from some big sociological issue to this visceral, personal terror.
That moment.
That
That's the shift from perception to reality we talk about. She talks about her sister later hearing on the police scanner, hearing the shooter screaming, all these Jews need to die.
And for Weiss, and really for the broader American Jewish community, that was the moment that the holiday from history was officially brutally over.
It just shattered the assumption of American exceptionalism when it came to Jewish safety.
It marked the unequivocal return of history, the realization that the safety they felt, that they took for granted, it was a temporary condition, not a permanent state.
And this is where we get to the central thesis that we really need to unpack. Because the question becomes, why? Why did this happen in Pittsburgh, of all places? And Weiss argues that we can't understand this if we view anti-Semitism as just another form of racism.
Correct. She argues it's not a static prejudice. It's not just, I don't like these people because they look different or I don't like their customs. It is a shape-shifting system of belief.
A shape-shifting system. I really want to drill down on that.
Yeah.
Because that concept explains why it seemed to pop up everywhere, in every ideology.
Precisely. It reemerges across these ideological extremes, right, left, radical Islam, and while the justification for the hate changes completely,
The function stays the same.
the function remains exactly the same. The language shifts to fit the era, but the machinery underneath is identical. And Weiss argues that its resurgence is actually a symptom of a much larger problem,
Which is,
a weakened social immune system within modern liberal societies.
okay, let's unpack that system itself. Because one of the most interesting insights in the book, and I think one of the most valuable for our listeners to really grasp, is the structural difference between anti-Semitism and, say, standard racism.
Yes.
I think most people, they just lump them all together as bigotry.
They do, and that's a critical mistake if you want to understand the mechanism. This is so important for a systems analysis. Racism, generally speaking, involves punching down.
Punching down, meaning what exactly?
Meaning it views a target group as inferior, less capable, less intelligent, subhuman even. It's a justification for subjugation.
Okay.
We can enslave these people or we can exploit these people because they are lesser than us. That's the logic of, say, colonial racism or Jim Crow racism. It justifies economic exploitation by claiming the victim isn't fully human.
But anti-Semitism functions differently.
Completely differently. Historically and systemically, anti-Semitism almost always involves punching up.
Punching up.
In the anti-Semitic worldview, the Jew is not inferior, not at all. The Jew is a secret, all-powerful manipulator. They are the puppet master. They're the ones pulling the strings of a global economy, the media, the government.
And this explains why it's so much more dangerous, in a way. Because you don't just hate the Jew, you fear the Jew.
Exactly. You see yourself as punching up against a perceived oppressor. You're a freedom fighter in your own mind. This is why the conspiracy theory aspect is so central. You literally cannot have modern anti-Semitism without conspiracy.
You have to believe that this tiny group of people, what is it, 0.2% of the world's population?
Not even. An infinitesimal number. You have to believe that they are somehow orchestrating the fate of the other 99.8%. It's a fundamental break from reality.
The book lists these incredible contradictions that really prove this point. To the communist, the Jew is the arch-capitalist, the banker, the bourgeois oppressor.
Right. But to the Nazi, the Jew is the race polluter, the Bolshevik, the agent of chaos trying to tear down the capitalist system.
And to the anti-nationalists today, the Jew is the arch-Zionist, the ultimate nationalist.
It's almost impressive how adaptable it is. The Jew becomes a symbol of whatever a given civilization defines as its greatest evil. It's a container that you can pour all of society's anxieties into.
So if your society hates capitalism,
The Jews are the bankers.
if your society hates immigrants,
The Jews are the ones opening the borders.
if your society values tradition and order,
The Jew is the cosmopolitan modernist who's destroying tradition. It can be anything and everything all at once.
it's like a grand unified theory of hate.
Weiss actually uses a similar term. She quotes a French journalist, Edouard Drumont, from way back in 1886. All comes from the Jew, all returns to the Jew. It functions as a conspiracy theory that explains everything that is wrong with the world.
And that is psychologically very appealing, isn't it? I mean, the world is complex, economics are confusing, cultural shifts are scary for a lot of people.
Exactly. It simplifies all of that complexity.
Right.
Economic downturns, cultural shifts, wars, pandemics. It boils it all down to a single, identifiable enemy. It has incredible explanatory power for the person who believes it.
Why did I lose my job? The Jews. Why is the culture changing in ways I don't like? The Jews.
It's a mental shortcut. It takes the chaos and randomness of the world and imposes a neat, tidy narrative order onto it. And in that narrative, you're the hero fighting the villain.
Which leads to the other big metaphor Weiss uses throughout the book, the virus. She describes anti-Semitism as an intellectual disease.
It's a great metaphor because it really captures the latency of it, the idea that it isn't always active.
Right.
It's encoded in the cultural DNA of Western civilization.
Yeah.
It can lie dormant for decades, even generations, when a society is stable and healthy.
So during that holiday from history, the virus was there, but the host body America was strong enough to keep it suppressed.
The immune system was working, but when that social immune system weakens,
And the virus activates.
the virus activates. When democratic norms start to erode, when stability fractures, when people get desperate for someone to blame, the virus wakes up and starts to replicate.
And that's why she suggests that the rise of anti-Semitism is actually a diagnostic tool.
Yes. It's a warning sign. It tells you that the democracy itself is sick. It appears when the social contract is breaking down.
Before we get into the specific variants of this virus, the three-headed dragon, as she calls it, there's one more conceptual framework I found really fascinating.
Okay.
The difference between Purim anti-Semitism and Hanukkah anti-Semitism. This comes from the writer Dara Horn, who is referenced in the book.
Yes, this is a brilliant distinction for understanding the goal of the hatred, because not all anti-Semitism wants the same thing.
Right. So Purim anti-Semitism, this is named after the biblical story of Esther.
Correct. In that story, the villain Haman wants to physically annihilate the Jews. Simple as that. The goal is dead Jews.
This is the Nazis. This is the Pittsburgh shooter.
Exactly. It's very straightforward, very horrific. The message is, we want you gone from the earth. It focuses on the physical body of the Jew.
But Hanukkah anti-Semitism is different.
Very different, and in some ways more subtle. In the Hanukkah story, the Syrian Greeks didn't necessarily want to kill all the Jews physically. They wanted to erase their distinctiveness.
Assimilate them by force.
Right. They banned circumcision. They banned observing the Sabbath. The message wasn't die. The message was, you can survive, you can live among us, but only if you stop being Jews.
So the goal is cultural erasure.
It's cultural homogenization. It pressures Jews to abandon their particularism, their unique traditions, their connection to Israel, their distinct identity, in order to be accepted by the dominant culture. It attacks the soul of the Jew.
And Weiss argues we see both of these systems operating today, often at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. You have the Purim threat of physical violence from one direction and the Hanukkah threat of social ostracization and cultural erasure coming from another.
So let's map this out. Weiss describes a three-headed dragon, three distinct sectors where this virus is currently replicating. Let's start with Sector 1, the far right.
The far right. This is perhaps the most visible form in terms of recent physical violence in America. Here, the ideological system is white supremacy and nationalism.
Straightforward enough.
And the core narrative driving it is something called replacement theory.
We heard this in Charlottesville, the marchers with the tiki torches chanting, "Jews will not replace us."
Right. And we need to really parse what that actually means, because on the surface, it sounds confusing. Why would Jews replace them?
It's a small population.
The narrative is the Great Replacement. It's the belief that white people are being systematically replaced by non-white immigrants in order to destroy white civilization.
Okay, but where do the Jews fit in? They're often seen as white.
And here is where the punching up mechanic comes right back in. In this worldview, white supremacists often view other minority groups, black people, Muslims, Latinos, as inferior or, incapable of organizing this massive global takeover on their own.
So in their twisted logic, someone smart, powerful, and malevolent must be directing the whole thing.
They need a puppet master.
And that's the Jew.
Exactly. The Jew is the invisible hand. The Jew is the one opening the gates, funding the caravans, orchestrating the whole conspiracy. This narrative explains the loss of social status for the white majority without forcing them to confront complex economic realities like automation or globalization.
He gives them a simple target.
A simple, powerful, evil target. The book brings up the Pittsburgh shooter, Robert Bowers. And this was a detail I hadn't fully realized at the time. He wasn't just angry at immigrants in the abstract.
No, he was specifically angry at HIS.
The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, yes. HIS is a Jewish organization that helps refugees of all backgrounds, not just Jewish ones. Bowers' final post on social media before the attack was about HIS bringing in invaders that kill our people. He saw a Jewish organization as the literal mechanism for white destruction.
So that's the system of the right.
Ah,
Jews as the betrayers of the white race, manipulating other minorities to destroy it from within.
it's terrifyingly clear, and it's the classic Purim-style direct physical threats.
But then we moved Sector 2, the far left. And this is where I think the shape-shifting nature of the virus really becomes apparent, because the language here is completely different.
It's night and day. It's a total inversion. On the right, the language is blood and soil and race. On the left, it's the language of justice, anti-racism, and human rights.
It's the language of the university seminar, not the militia chat room.
Precisely, which makes it so much harder to identify, especially for people who consider themselves progressives.
Right. If you see yourself as a person who fights for the oppressed, it's very jarring and confusing to be told that your movement might be harboring an ancient prejudice.
The ideological system here is anti-colonialism and intersectionality. And the core narrative that it all hinges on is Zionism is racism.
Weiss spends a lot of time on the origins of this. She argues this isn't just some spontaneous reaction to Israeli policy. There's a specific genealogy here.
A crucial history that is so often forgotten or ignored, the Soviet connection.
Right.
Weiss details Operation SIG, a Cold War propaganda campaign by the Soviet Union. This is a fascinating piece of, well, deep dive history. The Soviets wanted to win influence with the Third World and Arab nations during the Cold War.
So this was a purely geopolitical strategy.
100%. They realized they couldn't just use old-school European-style anti-Semitism because, while the Holocaust had made that unfashionable, you couldn't just talk about the greedy Jew anymore in polite company.
So they rebranded.
They rebranded. They effectively did a find it and replace on the text. They took old anti-Semitic tropes, conspiracy, control, dual loyalty, and they just swapped the word Jew for Zionist.
And Judaism for Zionism.
Exactly. They framed Israel and the very idea of Jewish self-determination, Zionism, as the ultimate imperialist, colonialist, racist project. And this wasn't just a few pamphlets.
No, this culminated in the 1975 UN resolution equating Zionism with racism.
Which was a massive victory for Soviet propaganda. And Weiss argues that even though the Soviet Union collapsed, the software they wrote is still running.
It's like a legacy code in the operating system of the global left.
That's a perfect analogy. It infiltrated academia, progressive movements, and international bodies. It became the default, almost reflexive way to talk about the conflict.
But then you have to ask, how does this fit with intersectionality? Because in theory, intersectionality is about understanding overlapping oppressions. Shouldn't it protect Jews?
In theory, yes. Jews have historically been one of the most persecuted groups on Earth. It should be a textbook case.
So what's the problem?
Weiss argues that, as it is often currently applied, intersectionality can function as a very rigid caste system of oppression, a hierarchy.
An oppression Olympics.
You could call it that. To be a victim, you need to fit a certain profile. And Jews, especially in America, are perceived as white and successful.
So they get automatically placed in the oppressor bucket.
Correct. In this very binary worldview of oppressor versus oppressed, if you are perceived as successful or powerful, you cannot be a victim, period.
So Jews are stripped of their ability to claim victimhood, even when they're being targeted for being Jews.
Right. If a Jew complains about anti-Semitism, especially from a progressive source, it's often seen as a powerful white person complaining about feeling uncomfortable, rather than a minority group signaling genuine danger.
And this leads to something Weiss calls the Livingstone formulation. Can you explain that?
It's named after Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of London. It's a rhetorical tactic, a kind of argumentative judo. Any accusation of anti-Semitism coming from the left is automatically dismissed as a bad faith attempt to silence legitimate criticism of Israel.
So it's a closed loop. There's no way to win that argument.
It's a perfect self-sealing logical loop. If you say that statement was anti-Semitic, the immediate response is, you're just weaponizing anti-Semitism to protect Israel from criticism. It makes it impossible to actually call out bigotry if it comes from a progressive source.
It acts as a shield.
A very effective one. It allows old anti-Semitic tropes to circulate freely under the guise of political critique.
And this brings us right back to the Hanukkah dynamic, the conditionality.
Yes. On the far left, the implicit message is, you are welcome in our movements, but you must leave your Zionism at the door. You have to disavow a core component of modern Jewish identity, the connection to the ancestral homeland, to be considered a good Jew in these progressive spaces.
It's the good Jew versus bad Jew dichotomy. The good Jew is the one who agrees with us and denounces their own community's consensus. the bad Jew is a Zionist.
Which is a classic control mechanism used against minority groups throughout history. It splits the community against itself. It tells young Jews that the price of social acceptance is the amputation of a part of their identity.
Okay, so we have the right with its white supremacy and the left with its anti-Zionism. Now, Sector 3, radical Islam. Weiss calls this the synthesis.
This is where the virus mutates by combining different strains. Radical Islam, as Weiss describes it, has its own internal religious fundamentalist interpretations, of course. But critically, in the 20th century, it absorbed a massive dose of European anti-Semitism.
The book mentions the direct import of Nazi and Soviet propaganda into the Middle East.
Yes. It's a tragic historical convergence. You have the importation of texts like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and European-style blood libels. These were translated into Arabic and distributed widely, becoming part of the political mainstream in many places.
You get this hybrid form of hate.
Weiss calls it a malignant trilogy, a fusion of anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, and anti-modernism. It blends the religious fervor of God wants this with the political justification of they are colonialists, mixed with the racial conspiracy of they are evil global manipulators.
And the feedback loop here must be incredibly intense.
It creates a social outcome where this hatred becomes normative in parts of the Middle East, and then it migrates to Europe with immigration. Weiss cites the horrific violence in France and Sweden. You have Jews fleeing these areas because physical safety has completely evaporated.
And we're not talking about insults or bad tweets here.
No, we are talking about murder, kidnapping, torture. The murder of Ilan Halimi in France is a key example. It's brutal, Purim-style violence.
And what's the reaction from European authorities in these cases?
Often paralysis. They are hesitant to address it for what it is because they're afraid of being accused of Islamophobia or racism against the Muslim minority.
So you have one minority, the Jews, being targeted by members of another minority, and the state is too paralyzed by its own identity politics to intervene effectively.
It leaves the Jewish community completely vulnerable, caught in the middle. It's a truly paralyzing dynamic.
So we have this three-headed dragon breathing fire from all sides. How is this actually playing out right now? What are the present-day implications for someone listening to this?
Well, just look at the university campus discourse. That is the absolute front line.
Yeah.
Weiss provides details from students who are hiding their Star of David necklaces under their shirts, or what she calls the progressive conversion that's required.
Price of admission.
Exactly. If you want to enter social justice spaces, if you want to fight for women's rights or climate justice or LGBTQ rights, you often have to first sign on to a platform that denounces Zionism as racism, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with the cause at hand.
It's forcing a choice. Your identity or your political home.
Precisely. And for many, that leads to massive self-censorship. But broader than that, it signals this deep erosion of liberal norms. The political center, that space for debate, nuance, tolerance, disagreement, is being hollowed out.
And people are just flocking to the extremes.
And when you go to those extremes, tribal loyalty demands you buy into the whole package. If you join the far right, eventually you have to accept the globalist conspiracy. If you join the far left, you have to accept the Zionist colonialist conspiracy.
There's no room for nuance.
None. You cannot say, I support Israel's right to exist in safety, I support Palestinian rights and statehood. That middle ground is evaporating because both extremes demand total purity.
I want to pause on that normalization concept, because the book makes a really profound point about how systems of belief can literally override reality. This connects so directly to our project here, Crisis in Perception.
It is the absolute core of the issue. The system of anti-Semitism functions by replacing reality with a narrative.
Okay, let's break that down.
Think about the reality for a second. Jews are a tiny, tiny minority globally, roughly 0.2% of the world population.
It's tiny, statistically insignificant in terms of raw numbers. If you put the entire world population in a football stadium, the Jews wouldn't even fill a single section.
Right. But the perception within the anti-Semitic system is that this same tiny group is an all-powerful global cabal controlling banks, media, and governments. The system cannot function without this massive, fundamental distortion of perception.
It requires the believer to ignore the evidence of their own eyes.
Completely. To ignore that Jews are often vulnerable, politically diverse, and constantly disagreeing with each other, and replace all that messy reality with the simple, clean myth of the all-powerful monolith.
It reminds me of the Soviet lie you mentioned earlier, how the system outlasts the facts. The Soviet Union is gone, but the narrative they engineered, Zionism as racism,
Hmm.
is still the default operating system in so many places.
That is a perfect example of a system outlasting its creator. Ideas, once they're planted and incentivized, are very, very hard to kill. And we have to look at those incentives. Why do people adopt these views? Why is it so sticky?
You're talking about social currency.
Exactly. In these circles, it pays to be an anti-Semite, even if you don't call it that. On the right, you gain purity points by defending the white race against the invader and their puppeteers.
Mm-hmm.
On the left, you gain virtue points by denouncing the oppressor, which has been defined for you as Israel and Zionism. In both cases, excluding the Jew is a shortcut to belonging. It proves your loyalty to the tribe.
It's a mechanism for group cohesion. We know who we are because we know who we hate.
And that is why it is so dangerous. It's never just about the Jews. It's about what the society values. If a society values truth, pluralism, and individual dignity, anti-Semitism has a very hard time taking root.
But if a society values tribalism, conspiracy, and ideological purity,
Anti-Semitism flourishes. It is the ultimate indicator of a society turning against its own liberal values.
so where does this leave us? The picture Weiss paints is, well, it's alarming. It really feels like the walls are closing in from all sides. What is the conclusion? What does she suggest we do?
Weiss is very clear that the solution is not just fighting back in a defensive way. She actually critiques the traditional Jewish response.
Which has been what?
Historically, the response has often been to form defense leagues, to apologize, to try to prove we are good citizens, we are not the bad guys you think we are. She calls that begging.
Building is better than begging. That's the phrase from the book.
Yes. She advocates for affirmation, for leaning into the identity, not away from it. She calls it the Pittsburgh Principle.
Okay.
The idea is that Jews should not waste their time asking their enemies to validate their humanity. Instead, they should double down on their own values, their own traditions, their own story.
It's an act of defiance through just existing.
And through confidence. If the system attacks you for being a Jew, the most powerful response is to be a Jew more loudly, more proudly, to nurture the very particularism that the system wants to erase.
So if they want you to hide your Star of David, you wear a bigger one.
Exactly. If they want you to forget your history, you study it more deeply. If they want you to be ashamed of your connection to Israel, you learn more about it.
It's almost a counterintuitive strategy. Don't hide, amplify.
Right, because hiding validates the bully's premise that there is something shameful about you. Affirmation rejects that premise entirely. It says, I am who I am, and I am not afraid.
And for the non-Jewish listener, for the person observing this system from the outside, who might be thinking, this is terrible, but it's not my problem.
This is where we get to the final, and I think most important, provocative thought. Weiss suggests that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine.
We hear that phrase a lot, but let's define it really clearly in this context.
It means that the Jews are almost always just the first target. They are the early warning system for a democracy in decay. The system of hatred that targets them thrives on silence, on the erosion of truth, and on the collapse of liberal values.
So if a society cannot protect its Jews,
It typically means it has lost the ability to protect free speech, to protect other minority rights, to protect the very concept of objective truth itself.
so the crisis isn't just for the Jews.
No. The alarm is deafening right now, and it suggests the crisis is for the very possibility of a liberal democratic future for everyone. If the canary dies, it means the air in the mine is toxic, and the miners are next.
The forces that hate the Jews also generally hate democracy, they hate free inquiry, and they hate difference itself.
It's a package deal. And breaking that system, she argues, requires the immense courage to be out of step with your own political tribe.
It means correcting your own side.
Yes, if you're on the right, you have to be the one to call out the white supremacists, even if it costs you friends or status. If you're on the left, you have to be the one to call out the anti-Zionists and the conspiracy theorists, even if it gets you ostracized or canceled. And that is a very difficult, very brave thing to do.
It requires constantly checking your own perception and recognizing that moment when a comfortable narrative is replacing uncomfortable reality.
Precisely. It demands that we prioritize truth over the comfort of tribal belonging.
We're going to wrap it up there. This has been a deep dive into How to Fight Anti-Semitism by Bari Weiss.
A difficult read, but a really essential one for understanding the systems at play in our world right now.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter, visual overview of this topic, see the mini-explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.